It's a big day in constitutional monarchies today.
Yes, the Parliament was officially dissolved. The Governor-General's statement read out on the steps of Parliament.
Yeah, well, there's that. And also, a year ago, Queen Elizabeth died.
Oh,
Yeah.
that is sad.
You did not get that memo. G'day, I'm Simon Ewing-Jarvie.
And I'm Heather Roy. Welcome to VoterTorque.
Yeah, welcome back. So, changing of the guard then.
Yeah, I think that's appropriate for today.
Yeah, how are you feeling about the mood of the campaign so far, Heather?
Well, it's been really interesting this week. It's this is the first week of the official campaign. People could be forgiven for thinking that started in January this year because there's been so much talk about the election, and since then, I think this is shaping up to be a very, very interesting election because the two big old parties, which have always been dominant, really not this election, and what we've considered to be the smaller parties, ACT and the Greens, can't be described as minor parties any longer, I don't think.
No, I don't think you can. I mean, it doesn't matter which poll you look at. Those two parties hold between 20 and 30% of the vote.
Yeah, and that means that for the forming of a government, things are going to look quite different. Matthew Hooton, who writes for the Herald, had a very interesting phrase today. He talked about National and ACT as a duopoly.
Yeah, just like the supermarkets, eh?
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe the ComCom will have an investigation.
Well, they might, and but I do think the really interesting thing for me is I think this is shaping up to be a real MMP election, and I think that the duopoly does indicate, that hangover from first past the post, but that's not what this election is looking like.
Yeah, I mean those two parties, National and Labour, the purple vote, would love everyone to treat it like that, but the mainstream media is actually helping them in that regard, isn't it?
Yeah, they are. They're still reporting. If you look at the coverage from this week, they follow Labour and National around and announce quite faithfully their policy initiatives, but you hear very little of the policy commentary from ACT and the Greens and Te Pāti Māori and some of the other smaller parties. And so it's much easier for them just to report things as if there is a duopoly rather than giving more proportional coverage to the other parties as well.
Yeah, do you think that's intentional, or is that just, that's just
I think
easier?
It's easier to do. I think sometimes it's a little intentional. I think that, but you just can't ignore, we just talked about 30% of the vote now being ACT and the Greens. Are they getting 30% of coverage? I don't think so.
Yeah, and they're not minor parties, as we said.
No.
They're now what you'd call mid-range parties.
Yeah.
But that does, so looking at how the poll trends are firming up, I mean, we've been watching them for a few weeks and we've had a couple of episodes talking about them, but the directions and the levels are actually are starting to settle down, aren't they?
They are, and we've always said it's the trend that's important. Don't look at an individual poll, look at the trends. And we're routinely now seeing National and Labour in the low to mid-30s. In fact, the last few polls, Labour's been under 30% and they'll be seriously worried about that. And the Greens and ACT polling anywhere between 12 and 18% reliably. The interesting thing is the number of unknown voters, or the voters who are saying they don't know how they will vote.
Yep.
If you looked back a couple of weeks ago, that figure was around 12% on average. Now it's dropped to around 6 to 7%.
Yeah.
So people, not only are the polls firming, people in their own minds are firming up who they're going to vote for.
Yeah. And talking about media coverage, you know how there's the broadcasting, fund for people to, or for parties to use the
public funding is allocated proportionately. So whatever you got last election is the proportion of the broadcasting taxpayer funding that your party will receive. So ACT and the Greens will be down around 10%. They're polling more strongly than that at the moment, obviously, but that's what their allocation will be. And Labour actually will get the lion's share because they got 51% of the vote.
There is some element in the formula about how you're currently polling over a period of time as well. That's there is, because remember. Who was it, the Citizen Party, that comedian who was offering everyone a free alpaca? Yeah, he got some funding. It was basically because he was polling.
Yeah. So, do you think the current arrangement is fair? What would you do?
No, I don't think it's fair, and I think it reinforces the old duopoly.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to bring fresh voice into Parliament, the taxpayers should fund fresh voice. So at the very least, that taxpayer broadcast fund should be allocated evenly across all the parties who are, say, at 1% or higher.
No matter their size. Well, that would be an interesting way of doing things. It would also mean that it would be much harder for media to do what they currently do and chase the bigger parties much harder.
Yep.
National and Labour much harder.
Yeah, I mean, the big parties can raise funds anyway, so they can pay for their media.
They already have an advantage, that's
but
right.
if you look at smaller ones like, Top, New Conservatives, Aotearoa Legalised Cannabis Party, those sort of parties, why shouldn't they get a fair voice?
Yeah, much harder for them, you're absolutely right.
Right, well, it's shaping up like a real MMP election then.
Yeah, it is. I've been saying that for quite some time, and now I'm starting to actually believe it too.
I think it's not impossible still that we could have a hung parliament, right? So if, let's say, the worst case scenario for the current opposition parties is the Maori Party creates an overhang, so they just need to get a couple more seats than they might otherwise have had to. And so they need to get, say, 63 seats, counting a speaker, to get across the threshold that they need. That means they need Winston and New Zealand First's MPs to form a majority of that size. And ACT says there is no way we're working with Winston. So all ACT is ruled out at this stage is having New Zealand First in Cabinet. New Zealand First on the crossbench is supplying confidence Luxon could form a government, but every piece of legislation would have to go in front of him, and he would truly be the handbrake on the real change that ACT is talking about. And so in that situation, I can see ACT saying, no, we're not part of this, in which case we're back to the voting box.
Of all the parties that would be likely to take a principled approach to that, it would be ACT. I agree. Yeah, I don't think it's likely, but it's certainly not impossible.
Yeah. Well, there's a cheery thought, isn't it? 2 elections. Have we got enough storage space for another podcast episode, another podcast season?
Always.
Yeah, okay. Well, don't worry. If there's a hung parliament and a new election, we'll be here for you. We're in it for you.
You heard it here. Right, that's us for today. Please send us your questions. We're nearly ready to do another podcast with questions from viewers. So send those through to us through our media channels, LinkedIn.
Easiest way is on the contacts page on our website.
Or the contacts page.
Talkpoint.co.nz, TORQUE, Talkpoint, and we'll get those questions into the next episode.
We'll talk to you soon. I'm Heather Roy.
And I'm Simon Ewing-Jarvie.